All right. Welcome everybody to today's webinar on suicide prevention through early intervention. Today is May 23rd, 2024. Okay, just some housekeeping before we start today's event. We are shutting down the chat for this event. We are shutting it down because we are going to be using that to throw in resources that you can download for yourself. If you do have any questions for any of the presenters, feel free to use the Q&A feature that is provided through Zoom. The presenters or my colleague Derek, who is on the back end of this event, will get to those questions when they can. If not, we will use them to facilitate the questions and answers portion at the very end. We are recording this event. We will put this event up on our website. So if you go to calvet.ca.gov, you can find our archives section. There in the archive section, you will find this recording within a week or two. And you can find any other recordings that we've put up over the last couple years as we've went into COVID protocols and whatnot. Today we're going to be hearing from Robert Storr. He is with US Vets Outside the Wire. He's going to talk to you a little bit about risk factors and what to look for when working with individuals who may be at risk. After that, we'll have a quick little section where we'll talk a little bit about what CalTAP's all about. So I'm part of CalTAP, the California Transition Assistance Program. And we'll have a quick section that just talks to you about how we work with veterans and the different benefits that we can connect you with. Once that's done, then we'll start our questions and answers portion of the event. As I mentioned earlier, if you do have questions for any of the presenters, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll get to those when we can. If not, we will use them at the very end. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead now and pass it on to Robert Storr. Robert Storr is with US Vets. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to let him use his slides and navigate through his own slides. But Robert Storr is with US Vets Outside the Wire, and he's going to talk to you today about suicide prevention through early intervention. So go ahead, Robert, when you're ready. Oh, Robert, you're on mute.
Good morning. That won't work out. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Derek. Special shout out to Derek for all the work you have been doing with us as you get ready to move on to a new opportunity. I want to really tell you how much we appreciate you, and Michael, you as well. It's great to be here this morning, and thank you all for coming to listen on Mental Health Month. May is Mental Health Month to really heighten our awareness of mental health and for us to talk about specifically today about suicide and also some of the skills we can get. There's a lot of information coming your way, so I wanted to make sure you don't feel overwhelmed. This isn't another opportunity to stress you, hopefully. I'm going to share a lot of information. I'll try to pause when it's something I really want you to hold on to, and a lot of it will be repetitive. So we're basically going to talk about the components of suicide in the form of risk factors that we face and protective factors, risk factors that make it more likely someone is potentially at risk for dying by suicide, protective, what keeps people safe in that category. Can we see the slides okay, Michael and Derek?
Yeah, the slides are good.
Great. So let me get started, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can progress this forward. Here we go. So the thing that I want to talk about is probably the thing we all know the best that we do the least is listening. I like this quote, listening is an connection to the heart, a genuine desire to be with another, which both attracts and heals. The idea is we go through so much, we have so much coming at us during the day that we don't often take the time to do the most important thing. And this is one of the most protective factors in suicide prevention, and that's to connect with one another, to take the opportunity to not only hear one another, but to listen to the content of what the other person is saying. And I am as guilty of this as an expert. I'm a clinician for 30 years. And oftentimes during the day when I'm looking at emails, hustling between meetings, answering questions, and working on things at my desk, someone will come by and share something. And it's not often I really pause and try to listen. It's not just hearing the content, but hearing what the person's feelings are behind the content. Are they excited? Are they sad? Are they nervous? Are they anxious? And then not only being able to hear it, being able to address it. If you do just that, if you get that out of today, and you take a moment today to really hear your colleagues, the people you work with, the clients, or the veterans that come in, or the veterans' friends and family, that you have, you will really begin to understand how much that works, not only for you, but for them as well. But before I do that, let me talk a little bit about suicide. This is important, especially to the veteran community, and the fact that I don't know how many of you are aware that it began right here in LA. And it was actually suicide prevention didn't start until the late 50s, late 1950s, which means it's still a relatively new field. And it was actually begun by veterans. These three veterans, specifically the top two, Norman and Edwin, got together and they were working at the West LA VA hospital over in Brentwood, and they were looking at suicide notes. They had actually been hired to write notes to World War II widows of condolences, and then they came across a number of suicide notes. So they asked the coroner's office here in Los Angeles if they would help them do this experiment. If they would write notes that were artificial, manufactured by their team, and if they would give them with the real notes and see if they could discern the difference. And in fact, they could. And the way they figured out the difference was this one particular case, which led to the beginning of suicide prevention. And that was the suicide notes that were authentic contained this fact, that the people weren't writing about wanting to die, they were writing about their desire to live and the difficulty they had in dealing with the pain. This was the very first time in the history of suicide prevention that they said, if people don't actually want to die, if they're trying to live, but they're dealing with a significant amount of pain that's creating the process of death, then we have an opportunity to intervene there. And they began the work with that. Later on, Marilyn Monroe would die in the 60s, and they would be called upon to rule if it was a suicide or if it was a homicide. When they ruled it was a suicide, they were here in Los Angeles. Their phones rang off the hook with people all across the United States who were feeling suicidal thoughts, were thinking suicidal thoughts. And they began to answer the line, and their wives helped out. And their wives were the first crisis line counselors in the United States. So remember this one fact. If you take nothing away today, remember this, that ambivalence is the process of simultaneously having two things, the desire to die, but also the desire to live. And what the person is going through is psychological pain, psyche. And if we can help them express it and we can hear it, we can begin the process of suicide prevention. I think this is information that most everybody is aware, but it's important. It's important to understand that suicide is still somewhat rare, so we don't need to catastrophize it, but it's significant. And we have almost 47,000 suicides a year, depending on the year. Men die 4 times as often as women do. It's the second leading cause of death in veterans under the age of 45. That's significant, 13th overall. What this does is it tells us we have a responsibility to look at this population that we're working with, or if you're a veteran, that look at our brothers and sisters, to understand that we are a population that's more at risk as veterans. Veterans, in fact, make up 16% of the suicides, and the final fact is firearms accounted for almost 70% of veteran suicide deaths. This is important because the suicide crisis is relatively brief. And if you can keep somebody from a lethal means, they can often get through the crisis and get help. However, if they have access, it makes it more likely than they'll be able to die in an impulsive moment. If you've ever gone through a really irrational moment where you're really upset, really disturbed about something, I'll take a work situation that's a little less tragic, and you write an email because you're really mad at the person or the situation, and then you send it. And then about an hour, 2 hours later, or the next day, you go, oh my God, why did I send that? I didn't need to say all that. It wasn't that big of a deal. Similar things happen to someone who's in a crisis. They begin to feel a certain amount of anxiety and that significant amount of pain, they're trying to work it through. So things to remember, still today, there is no single cause. We may see that somebody died by suicide, they're going through a relationship breakup, or something significant happened, a financial issue, and that's why they died. That's not the reality. That may be the crisis they hit, but there were predisposing factors. Otherwise, most of us, when we hit a crisis, would struggle with it. The reality is most of us don't struggle with suicidal ideation or thoughts. And for those of us who do, they're just thoughts most of the time. But for some of us, more than that. So it's actually a complex kind of marriage between risk factors and protective factors we're going to look at. Again, risk factors increase the likelihood that you would die by suicide. Protective factors prohibit or increase the likelihood that you would not die by suicide. So we have a simple equation for veterans, for family members, friends, for us as providers. for us as individuals to know that if I can work on helping you in whatever capacity, whether it's employment, mental health, whatever capacity I'm giving you a service, benefits, access, then I can remind you of all of the protective factors or deal with that. And I also can hopefully make it comfortable for you to talk about suicide. So on the left side, you'll see some of the risk factors. Take a look at those again. I don't want you to have to feel like you have to remember them all, but I want you to be able to identify some of them. The top one, the prior suicide attempt, if we do an assessment of an individual, such as a mental health clinician or social worker, and we find they have a history of a suicide attempt, that should tick us right away to always check for the individual's mental health well-being. I'll give you an example of a physical health issue. And heart disease is the one that comes most clearly to mind for a man of my age. And the reality is, people dealing with heart issues have certain risk factors, and the risk factors make it more likely that you're going to die by heart disease. Those risk factors are what? High cholesterol, being overweight, being high blood pressure, having lack of exercise, a family history, hereditary history of heart disease. If I have those and my doctor assesses for all of those, every time I go into the doctor's office, they'll be checking my cholesterol, my blood pressure. They may even give me medication, right? Well, if we understood the same thing about mental health and suicide prevention, and this holds true for mental health as well as suicide prevention, that there were certain issues that we should always check someone on to make sure they were okay, and we normalized it, then we'd go a long way towards preventing suicide. And here are the protective factors. Again, we know that people who struggle with suicide or suicidal thoughts have mental health issues, untreated mental health. They lack a sense of connected. They may be isolated. In a crisis, they may lack the problem-solving skills. Sometimes a sense of spirituality will keep people safe. A mission or purpose is important. I'll never forget, there was a homeless man that we worked with that from Department of Mental Health that was an amazing outreach worker. He came off the streets one day when someone gave him flyers to hand out because that gave him purpose. Giving someone purpose gives us reasons to go on. Physical health issues, I know it sounds standard to have good sleep, good rest, and to exercise, but those are the baseline for how we deal with life. If you're not getting good sleep, if you're not being able to stay in good health, then you're already raising the risk factor, being employed, and of course, social and emotional well-being. So the idea is, let's just sort of sum that up in a kind of easy way. Look at the factors in sort of a general way. We're looking at a suicide attempt, possibly in someone's history. And again, it doesn't mean that everybody that's had an attempt will die by suicide, but it means that if they've gone to that point, that individual has a risk factor that we'd want to monitor on a regular basis, like a physician for someone with heart disease. We all are going to be looking at our mental health today. It's an extremely stressful culture we live in now. The higher the technology development goes, the more stressed we become because the more work it puts in front of us. We're no longer walking to meetings. We can have meeting after meeting after meeting, throw in a couple emails that happen between meetings, conversations that happen that you should have. And our mental health stress is elevating. So we want to assess that and assess what level is that impacting. If we have the issue of substance abuse, about 50 to 60% of the time, people who die by suicide are also dealing with substance abuse. Exposure to trauma, whether you're a veteran that was a combat veteran or a veteran that was had some experience of trauma either in or outside of the service, or as a child, if you're a non-veteran, that can contribute to later development of mental health issues. And finally, that last one I was talking to you about, that crisis. If you have any of these and you hit a crisis, it's sort of like if I had heart disease in the sense of high cholesterol, high blood pressure, was overweight, and I was shoveling snow in Minnesota in the wintertime, I would be aggravating my heart to the point that I could create a heart issue. So similar with suicide, the person having these risk factors may be going through life just fine up until a crisis situation. So it's always important to look at the immediacy of that. Let's look at the perspective of a person that may be suicidal. The important thing is anybody you're dealing with, family members, friends, veterans, one another, if you know somebody's in crisis and you know they have a history of mental health issues or suicidal thoughts, then you want to pay special attention because this is what's happening. That pain factor we talked about, that psychache, has become elevated, and there becomes a desire or a desperate desire or process to escape that pain. The only way I ever really got in touch was this when I had a knee surgery, and I decided because of the issue around pain medication, I wasn't going to get that prescription filled. As the anesthesia wore off that evening, 1 o'clock, my knee started to throb. 2 o'clock, it started to hurt. By 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning, I was in such pain that I would have done anything, chopped off my knee, done whatever. I had to eventually call the doctor's office and get an immediate delivery of medication, or I would have been transported to the hospital. But imagine being in that amount of psych pain, that amount of mental health issue, and not knowing what to do about it. That's when our thinking becomes limited. And in fact, our brain does specifically strange things or sort of adaptive techniques that we want to take a look at when we are in a particular crisis. And one of the things it does is it stops our ability to think of multiple options. So if I'm in a particular crisis about my job or a particular financial crisis, and I'm worried about my job and my rent and my financial situation, I'm not going to think about other jobs or borrowing money. I might just start to panic and think there aren't any other options. I might, in fact, start to think negative thoughts about myself, creating the pain. And all of a sudden, the options seem like that little light at the end of the tunnel there. That's the only way out. And if I don't think I can get to that light and the rest of the world looks dark and I feel isolated, that's going to increase again the likelihood that I'm going to feel in trouble. Now, remember, this could be a temporary situation when someone's in crisis. And in fact, cognitive or thought distortions will kick in, like all or nothing thinking, like, okay, I either like excel at this job or I'm going to get fired. If I get fired, I'm going to lose my apartment because I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, right? Most likely, if you were in trouble at work, you would probably maybe get a warning, or you maybe fortunately, hopefully get some help and some support. But again, you start going down that path that it's not okay. You might start catastrophizing like that, thinking really bad things are happening. And then you might generalize and think that all the things that are happening around you are bad. And that's what we call emotional congruence. When we feel bad as human beings, what the brain does is it automatically looks for the reason. So since it's feeling bad, it's going to look for the negative reasons that you are where you are. Are you under financial strain? Are you having difficulty with your job? Is your life stressful? Is your relationship working okay? Is your health all right? And guess what? It will bring up all of those areas and the problems in those areas. So all of a sudden, that little problem at work became a huge issue and increased the pain. With that in mind, how can we tell when someone reaches a crisis? In the field of suicide prevention, we look at warning signs, and this is no matter where you've worked with the Suicide Prevention Center here in Los Angeles, with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, with the VA, they start to look at, they're expressed in 3 separate ways. The first being feelings. If you're working with people, individuals, veterans, that you notice a sudden shift in their ability to share, they become more anxious, mania, they become more excited, more like they've got the answer all of a sudden when they normally wouldn't. And it seems sort of out of place. Or depression, suddenly the depression is increasing, they're more withdrawn, more sad, more unable to express feelings. If there's a sudden change of any kind, these could be signals that the person is now reaching or about to reach a crisis. So warning signs should be an opportunity. We used to call them at the Suicide Prevention Center, an invitation for us to really step forward at this point and not just listen, but to begin to inquire about what's going on. There's another way you can look at individuals. If they are starting to exhibit them through certain behaviors, they're withdrawing, they're becoming more reckless, they're agitated. The other day when I was overstressed with multiple things to do and I was tired and I hadn't been getting enough sleep, I began to notice little things like I dropped a pencil or a pen under the table, and then something else, I knocked something in, and I started to get really anxious and upset at myself. And all of a sudden I began to realize this isn't normal. You just dropped a pen. And the reality is you usually knock at least one thing over a day. But I was getting agitated based on a particular situation of not taking care of my health and a number of things piling up. The last one is statements. Now, the odd thing about people that, not the odd thing, or the unique thing about people who are suffering from mental health and often thoughts of suicide is they try to express it to us. This is where listening comes in. Because the reality is it's almost like listening for another language. It's almost like they're speaking French or Spanish or some other language that we don't typically listen to, but they're trying to tell us. They may say things like, "Oh, it's not worth it. I don't feel like my life means anything," or "I don't care about anything anymore." A lot of what I hear today as a psychotherapist is what I call sort of an existential crisis, like um, things don't matter anymore. Look at what's happening in the world. And I don't really, I get this vague feeling of it doesn't really make any difference what I do or how much work I do or whether I'm really impacting the people I work with at my job. None of that is true, actually. It makes a significant amount of difference on an individual and a group and a family and a community level, everything all of us do. But that's what it feels like when someone's not feeling well. Now, those can be mental health statements, or those can be statements leading to somebody who's in a crisis. And how do we tell the difference? Well, we learn to recognize them through these ways, especially if someone is expressing hopelessness, feeling like there's no way out, or again, a summary of like anxiety, agitation. You're talking to them about how's your sleep been? How have you felt lately? Sudden rage or anger? Are you having any problems expressing in your interpersonal relationship? Engaging in risky activities without thinking, spending too much money, gambling away money, driving too fast on the road, drinking or using drugs to excess. Will tell you an individual that's sort of what we call passive suicidal behavior, the individual sort of flirting with the idea of death, increasing alcohol or drug use, I mentioned, and again, withdrawal from family and friends. A while back, I'm a very introverted individual. I live alone. I was in a particularly negative place. And so I was just needing to rest and sort of detach from people. Well, when I detached from one of my best friends, I just wasn't connecting through text or anything. Person called me, I think, within 1.5 or 2 days and connected and said right away, "Hey, I don't like it when you detach. Makes me nervous, makes me anxious," and connected with me right away. These are the types of activities we can do just for somebody who might be having a mental health issue or might actually be in danger of a suicidal crisis. How do we tell the difference? Well, most of us know now there are major components between thoughts, the capability, and actually the intent to die, but I'll review them briefly for you. And then in green is the buffers, again, the things that keep us alive. So again, I will tell you, a lot of us have thoughts of dying by suicide or may have the desire at various points, depending if we suffer from a depression or if we've lost someone to suicide or we've had some trauma in our lives. Those aren't particularly unusual, and often they aren't dangerous. So when you ask somebody about whether they've thought about suicide, I almost always will say, it doesn't necessarily mean you're suicidal or feeling suicidal, but it's important for us to talk about, and it's important for you to know that you can talk about it with me so that you have a place to express it. How do we dissolve pain, unease, discomfort, and mental health issues? We externalize them, we bring them up and out. If we don't do that, they become worse. The simple act of being able to talk about it, write about it, express it will help us resolve it. If someone has moved from not only thoughts to actually starting to think about how they would do it, you would ask them, "So you've told me you've had thoughts. Have you really thought about how you would do it? Have you gotten a plan?" If they say yes to that, or if they have a suicide attempt in their history, then they are sort of becoming low to medium risk. It still doesn't mean they're thinking of dying at the moment, but it means I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to assess. Now, the thing to remember about all this information, you're not expected to be the master being able to de-escalate someone with a suicidal crisis, but you should keep an eye out so you can get them to help if they are in need of it through the suicide prevention, the suicide crisis line, the VA services. The VA now has services available for anybody that's suicidal, whether you belong to any veteran, whether you belong to the VA or not. You can go in and get the services to make sure the risk is reduced or you're treated and kept safe. Intent is the last one I shared with you. And I've worked with clients through the years. Again, I've been a therapist for a long time. And I've worked with actively suicidal people. And it used to sort of scare me, like, how am I going to keep them alive? Well, I'm not going to keep them alive. But when I talk to them, I am going to assess them on a scale of 1 to 5. How are you feeling today? When I would do groups for people that were fresh out of the hospital, most of them would tell me, "Yeah, I'm thinking about killing myself." And yes, I know how I would do it because I've done it before. And the last question was, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to do that? 1 being no, it's just thoughts. I'm not worried. 2 or 3, you're thinking about it seriously. 4 or 5, you're thinking about it and you're beginning to plan it. 5, you don't think you can keep yourself safe. If it's a 5, then I need to get you to help immediately. There's no question. I'm going to call 911 or I'm going to call 988. 911 for an immediate rescue, 988 if I want to hook you to the crisis line. or the VA crisis line and have them help you out. But that's not something, unless you're a trained clinician or someone on the suicide prevention line, that I would expect that any of us would do. Again, how does a risk reach crisis? Well, we start out again with the thoughts. Now I put that in green because thoughts in and of themselves aren't necessarily good, but they're not necessarily a high risk element. If I've gone as far as to think about it, and I'm starting to plan it, then I would worry about it. Now, I'll tell you the other thing. If someone thinks about it and you ask them all the way through it, and I'll tell you about how to do that in a minute, oftentimes they will realize themselves that they are just thinking about it, that it's not a serious plan. But if the intent is there, the desire to die on a scale of 1 to 5 is active, then I'm going to make sure that I know I have a crisis on my hand and I better seek help from a clinician, a crisis line, or somebody to deal with it. Doesn't mean I always have to call 911. It just means I have to know how to de-escalate and determine if I need to call 911. And when in doubt, I need to escalate to at least finding help to determine that. So again, I'm going to go through these pretty rapidly and then sum this up with some more practical techniques on how you actually discuss this with individuals that you're working with or family members. And by the way, statistics are such that about 60% of us will have a friend or an acquaintance die by suicide. 40% of us, it will be a family member and close friend. So this is information that's relevant not only to the population you serve, but to yourself and to your family members around you. And I want you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and that if you get the opportunity, you make yourself available and make the people around you aware that you're okay for them to bring up mental health issues and talk about them. That may save a life. So again, we talked about desire can be asked in several ways. Have you thought about it? You've been thinking about it consistently in the last couple of months. Have you thought about it and you don't feel like you're valuable or you're a burden, like your life doesn't matter? Again, I told you a lot of people with everything going on today have sort of an existential crisis. In and of itself, that's not a bad thing, but it sometimes feels like what I do doesn't matter. If that's a prolonged feeling and it's leading into a depression or a deeper state of a mental health issue, that's something you'd want to take a look at. Do you feel trapped in a situation, especially a financial situation that you don't think you know the way out, or a job situation, or a bad relationship? For instance, if you were in a relationship with domestic violence, these are also situations that would create a potential or increase the desire. And do you feel like you're alone, again, isolated, like no one would miss you? Again, remember that these aren't accurate feelings most of the time, but someone may feel that because they're depressed and they're not thinking clearly, or they're in a crisis. Again, we talked about capability. Have you ever attempted suicide in the past, which would increase the likelihood? Have you lost someone? Those of you in the listening audience today, if you are a suicide loss survivor, that unfortunately increases your likelihood. I am a suicide loss survivor, so that also increases my likelihood. Fortunately, I'm not suicidal, but when I do have thoughts, or if I do have thoughts, I have gone through the process that I've identified all the buffers. One of them being I do a huge amount of work in suicide prevention. So that limits the possibility that I'll ever die by suicide. Are you having any problems with drugs or alcohol? Do you have any trouble controlling your anger or feeling angry all the time? Have you ever been violent? And have you felt anxious, heart racing, short of breath, or things like that, or often worried? The thing to remember about anxiety as well is it is one of the most treatable mental health conditions out there. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it is one of the worst things to suffer from, and it is one of the most treatable if you get the right help with a mental health professional. The last factor there, do you have access to a gun or some way to kill yourself? In the veteran community, most of our veterans, if you are a veteran, have some access because, of course, you've been trained to use a firearm and you know how to use it safely and you know all about it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. In fact, it can be a protective thing. The only time it would not be is if you're in a crisis and you have access and you are somebody with suicidal thoughts, ideation, or risk factors that would make it accessible in a crisis situation. The thing we know about a suicidal crisis is it's relatively brief. It lasts for a very short time. And if you can keep someone from a lethal means, chances are they will not, you can keep them during that short period, they will not die by suicide. Last one was an intent. And again, I won't spend too much time on that. We already talked about this. Is the last one. If I'm not sure what to do, then I could check that one scale. And this usually is asked on the crisis line on a scale of 1 to 5. And oftentimes, again, a 4 or 5 will show up. And they don't initiate a rescue. They usually work on de-escalating. So that crisis line can be a huge asset to you to turn somebody that you're worried over or talk to them about somebody you're worried about, to let them discuss and learn how to de-escalate it. Buffers, these are the reasons people who are feeling all of those things don't want to die. Believe it or not, often it is a pet in their life. It's the support of people in their life that they often don't think about because of that constricted thinking that we want to remind them. So we try to remind them, have you thought about who would miss you? Does anyone else know? I had a woman who had attempted several times. She had two young teenage boys that she never told that she'd been in and out of the hospital, that she shared custody with her husband. And the reality is, when she told them, they became a buffer because they were always then able to check on her and make sure she was okay. Again, finding your purpose, or sometimes reminding you that you have a sense of purpose. We all do in life. If it's a particular time in your life where you're sort of out of touch with that, or you're in a crisis that is sort of disconnected, it's important that you work to remember what that is, or to work with someone to find out that what that is. Oftentimes, especially in the veteran community, when you go from active duty to becoming a veteran, that's a big issue. All of a sudden, you had all this purpose. You had a very important, critical purpose to the safety of you, your brothers and sisters in the military, to the safety of the country, to the security of the country. And now all of a sudden you're a civilian, you're a veteran, but that purpose is missing. So that often creates a bit of a transition issue, and sometimes a significant transition issue that we want to work on and address and remind ourselves we all have purpose, whether we found it or not. And sometimes making us aware that that's normal to feel, that that's a difficult and almost impossible to bear sometimes transition. We can get through that. But again, the last part is how connected. I was filming the other day a roundtable discussion around suicide prevention, and with an actor and a director. And the actor was sharing that he was at the gym and he saw somebody that was suffering. And he went over to him and he just said, "Hello, are you okay?" And the guy brushed him off right away and said, "Yeah, fine." What that guy did later, in about 20 minutes, he went back to the actor, that the young man that had asked him, and he told him what was going on, and he began to sob and tell him, the difficulties he was facing. That actor knew nothing about suicide prevention when we were talking about it, but he had done one of the most essential things you can do as another person, is approach somebody else and take the opportunity to check in with them to see if they're okay. When I work individually in private practice, I will just often say, "What's going on? Tell me about it." And then the most important thing, I will listen. I'll take some time to gather the information. Sometimes you have to be quiet long enough because people aren't used to people listening to them. Okay, lastly, let's talk about some specific factors, and then we'll close it up with just a summary. How would you approach someone who's maybe suicidal? Yes, you would ask about thinking of killing yourself. You might just come out with that statement. You might say, "Are you having such a bad time? Can you tell me more about it? What's going on? Has it gotten so bad that you've ever thought of suicide? Have you thought of suicide in the past?" There's a lot of ways, and I'll talk about that. The difficulty is, of course, getting comfortable and remaining calm, because most of the time you're not in a crisis, you're assessing something and you're building a rapport. And if you listen really carefully, people will give you all the information you need. One thing also I want you to take away, so I'll stop for just a minute, is to remind you, you do not have to have the answers for anybody that you work with. You do not have to problem solve their life issues, the transition issues that are coming up. You can problem solve with them and you can help them find the answers. But again, oftentimes people have gone through multiple channels to find the answer. They know more than we do about what works and what doesn't work. And if you give them the opportunity, it not only creates the opportunity for you to hear the answer, it empowers them to know that they can find the answer and they're not dependent upon you. That's a really, really important factor. And we have to be patient enough in our helping selves to remember and respect that individuals usually can find it. The problem is when they're in crisis, they can't get through that process, and you have to be able to do that. So asking them about what's going on will build and develop a sense of rapport, listening to it, responding to it. So it's not just saying, "Oh, so you're having difficulty with your relationship." It's, how long has that relationship been going on? What's the difficulty about? "I'm sorry to hear that it's that difficult. Can you tell me more about it?" What that means is, I'm interested in actually hearing what you want to talk about, not just writing down something on a piece of paper. And when I gather that information, I'm going to begin to build a story about you. And guess what? You're going to be able to tell a story about you. And that's extremely empowering because most people aren't listening to us. Most people don't hear what we're saying, don't care about the struggles we're in. So if you take a few minutes to really listen, and not just listen, but listen to respond, again, you're connect and you're going to heal that individual. What's also going to emerge out of that when you're talking to somebody is options are going to come up. Remember that little slide about the fact that they forget what options are, or people in crisis, including myself and you, forget what options are because our brain becomes constricted. Once I open up that report, it's amazing. I found like in counseling sessions, often people will sort of wander around with various subjects and nothing seems to be connecting. And then about a half hour, 45 minutes into talking to them, all of a sudden the real issue will pop up and they'll very sequentially and logically present the issue. And then if I give them the opportunity, they can tell me what works and what doesn't work. And guess what? We can develop a plan. So if you keep that in mind, it's going to make you a much competent provider, helper, supportive, friend, family member, etc. Now, when people are in crisis, the important piece of that is what you want to do is make sure when you're done working with them or you're finished with the conversation, that if it was a person in crisis that you write down or you help them put in their phone a number or a process, or you make a phone call for them, that you remind them what you've decided to do. Because again, they're in crisis, they're not thinking clearly. Oftentimes their thought is constricted. So you're sort of that extra outside brain that can listen and be able to provide the opportunity to give them options and answers. But write it down, give them a cue, and that will help you right away. Managing a conversation, as I start to summarize here, here's an important fact, which I took a long time to learn. Don't ever tell anybody, it's a stupid idea or it's a long-term solution to a short-term problem, or how could you think something like that, or it's selfish, or you shouldn't think about suicide, or don't do it. Because the reality is often suicide is a thought that gives somebody an option for that pain. If I know I can do that, then I can bear the pain today. I'm going to guarantee I'm going to do everything to work with you, as are you, to make sure you don't use that option. But I'm not going to tell you not to do it, because the minute I do, that's going to shut you down from listening to me. Oh, you shouldn't think about that. That's normal to think about that. But let's think about what else. Because if I stop your thought process there, you're going to stay there. I'm going to already convince you that I'm not interested in listening to you, that I'm interested in telling you what I think and not listening to you. So leave it there. Again, we don't support it, we don't encourage it, but we don't take it off the table. Talk about the ambivalence. You're here talking to me. I know you've talked about wanting to die or thinking about suicide. What keeps you from doing that? What are the things that keep you sort of moving back and forth? We know that most people who suffer from thoughts about suicide are also wanting to live and thinking about life options. Can you tell me about some of those? That will identify the buffers, the reason that person wants to stay alive. That will also create some of the alternatives. But if you don't know what they are, which often we don't offer them. Have you thought about going to a bank for a loan for your financial situation? Did you think about a temporary job? Well, most likely the person you're working with has thought about all of those. But if they haven't, let them tell you first. So you don't spend a lot of time again. Let me tell you what I think is best for you. You tell me what you've done and tell me what's worked in the past and tell me how you got there. By the way, that will take an immense amount of pressure off of you as a practitioner, as a caseworker, as a friend, as a partner, because again, it presupposes that they have the answer. It empowers them. And guess what? It takes you off the hook. And the reality is we don't have the answer most of the time. We can make suggestions later. We can ask them if I can make suggestions, because our smart brains have some experience in that area. So it doesn't mean. And at the very end, we would do something like tell them how to stay safe and connect them to the resources. So let's summarize here. What have we been talking about? For the last period of time, the opportunity to really develop our listening skills, which is not only hearing somebody, but being able to respond effectively because we're listening and taking in how they feel. We're going to be asking questions. We're going to be uncovering some things, expressing some things, discovering things, and discussing things. Okay, let me check your skills here. What are we listening? We're listening to their story. What are we asking about? We're asking directly about suicide. What do we want to uncover? We want to uncover ambivalence, that desire to die against that desire to live. Again, remember, people who die by suicide don't want to die. They're just trying to figure out how to live through the pain or the crisis. we want to be able to listen to express empathy. It's not sympathy. I don't feel bad for you. I get a sense of your pain. I get a sense of your struggle. I hear that it's very tough for you. Validating somebody's feelings is really, really important because, again, we don't do that a lot. What will we discover? We'll discover the reasons they don't want to die. Because guess what? They're still with us. They're giving us an opportunity to remind them why they want to be here. And then we will discuss ways to stay safe. Now, these are really things that come with training and time. So I hope you at least maybe get the first part, the listen. And if you're working with individuals, I hope you assess at some point and you ask about suicide history, suicide thoughts. I hope at some point you are able to normalize that. So you make it okay for the person, because the reason they don't tell us about it, even though they want to, is because they're afraid. They're afraid we'll judge them. They're afraid we shame them. When I worked with attempt survivors, one of the things I found out is the crisis line was actually about 2 rooms behind where I was doing the group with attempt survivors when I was at the Suicide Prevention Center. So one night we did an exercise where we called the Suicide Prevention Center. And I would ask the people in the room, now, when you thought about killing yourself or your attempt, did you call the crisis line? And the answer predominantly was no. And I would ask, why not? Well, think about it. How many times have you felt really bad and you didn't tell your best friend, your partner, your husband, your wife, your relatives, your coworkers, anything about it because you were ashamed or embarrassed or just felt bad? That's happening all around us. We're all going through transitions and difficulties. And we often feel like maybe I failed, or I should have known better, or I made a mistake, or especially people dealing with addiction. My heart goes out always. More and more people are struggling with addiction because of the stress and strain of living today, and because it's sort of an immediate, controllable way, albeit maladaptive, to get out of a situation. And then there's a tremendous amount of shame. But when you're under stress, depressed, anxious, and you've been taking a pill and seeing a therapist and it's not working, maybe that did work for you. Now it's not going to work long term, and we don't recommend it, obviously. But we don't shame it either. And we tell you we know it's okay, and let's figure out a solution together, right? All right. So last couple of things here, and then I'm going to get back to Calvet to have them share some valuable information and give an opportunity to chat about a few questions. We're listening for this. What difficult life issues? What are the crises? Are they isolated? If they have difficult life issues, we're going to help them problem solve. If they're isolated, we're at least going to connect with them or connect them to resources. If they're having mental health issues, we're going to connect them to treatment. Chronic stress, we're going to remind them of biological, psychological resilience, ways to take care of yourself, your sleep, your eat, your exercise, your medical health, seeing your doctor. And if they're in a crisis, potentially we can do crisis intervention and de-escalate, or we're going to connect them to resources that can do that. Lastly, these are pretty clear things we've talked about. Don't keep it a secret, seek help, and follow up, or have someone follow up with them. And we talked about the listening. So how do we help someone who's suicidal? We ask them, have you been thinking about killing yourself? So that's it for the presentation. That's a lot of information. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Paul and Derek. Again, thank you guys for having me today, and we'll open it up to questions, answers, and information that they're going to share for you. But I appreciate your time and energy, but mostly I want to share how much I appreciate you at Calvet and CalTAP for the work you do in mental health and suicide prevention.
Thank you, Robert. That's very important information. Appreciate you guys being here today. Always a pleasure having you as vets working with us on these events. We're going to go ahead and move forward now. While I go and talk about CalTAP and what we're all about, feel free to throw in your questions to that questions and answers feature here in Zoom. Robert could get to those questions right away if he feels the need to, or we could use them to facilitate the questions and answers portion. But I'm going to go ahead and move on now. Again, Robert, thank you for being here. Thank you, US Vets, for taking the time to present and talk about this important topic. Okay, my name is Michael Cisneros. I'm a training coordinator with the California Transition Assistance Program. So what I'm going to do, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what we're all about, where we fall in the grand scheme of things. So if you think about, the federal, state, county, and local service providers, we are right underneath the federal level. So You have the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. We are the California Department of Veteran Affairs. We assist California veterans, their family members, and service members that are here in California. Underneath this are the county veteran service offices. These are where you go to get your benefits started. And you want to go here to ask about the benefits. You want to go here to get the process started. All the correspondence that go between, CalVet or the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, the county veteran service officers there will help you out with that process. And then the service writers, the local service writers are, regional. They offer different services and resources that can help you and your family members at any time transition into the civilian. Again, this is just a quick little snapshot of what kind of programs fall underneath each department. So with the U.S. side, or I'm sorry, the federal side, there's 3 different divisions or departments that fall underneath the USD DVA, the Health Administration, the Benefits Administration, and then the National Cemeteries Administration. As you can see, there's some of the different programs that fall underneath those divisions. And then on the right-hand side, you have CalVet. CalVet is a state department. Some of our top programs are there underneath our logo. We're the California Transition Assistance Program. We are a resource or a program that's offered to California veterans and their family members here in California. We also have a tuition fee waiver for child dependents, state cemeteries that are different than the federal cemeteries. We also have veteran homes too. So I'll talk a little bit about all those coming up, but just a little snapshot of what is offered on each side, the federal side and the state side. All right, so CalTAP, what is CalTAP? CalTAP is a transition assistance program that's designed to inform and connect veterans of all eras to their earned state and federal benefits, as well as provide continuous assistance as their needs change over time. And so I read that verbatim because that's pretty much what we do, word for word. We want to be there at every point of the transition, into civilian world, and be there to provide resources and information about benefits. So what we've done is we've developed different pathways that help veterans and their family members navigate those benefits and services. So you have an entrepreneurship pathway, you have an employment pathway, an education pathway. There's a core curriculum pathway that talks about benefits and services that don't fall into those topics that I just mentioned. And then we have a service writer pathway. So the service writer pathway is for individuals that do want to work with veterans or are interested in working with veterans. Kind of just lets them know about military culture and what to expect when you're working with this population. This is our life cycle map that we like to follow. So as you can see, when I say we want to be there, every step of the way, we want to be there when the service member joins, when they're serving, when they're separating, all the way up to when they're retiring, aging, and preparing for end of life. And so we have developed different webinars. We've developed different workshops that fit into these different parts of the life cycle that help veterans gather resources for wherever they're at in their life. This right here is your veterans resource book. So Derek is going to put a PDF copy of this into the chat. What I like to say is this book is like gold for veterans. So everything that we discuss when it comes to benefits that are available to veterans can be found in this book. So whether you're looking for education benefits or employment benefits, all that information can be found here in this book. It's going to tell you about the eligibility requirements. It will tell you about the documents that need to be submitted with it and where you need to turn them in. So it's a pretty valuable book. We'll put a PDF copy into the chat. If you want a hard copy, you can always go to your county veteran service office, and they should have hard copies there that you can pick up for free. This is what our website looks like, calvet.ca.gov. Our CalTAP banner is right there in the middle of the screen. If you click on that, that will take you to our pathways page, where you'll see the different pathways that I mentioned earlier. In the middle, the second circle is find local CVSO. So if you are looking to find your county veteran service office, You can use our search tool here on our website to find the closest ones to you based off of your zip code. And then also, if you scroll down to the very bottom of the page, you'll find the publication section of our website. The first link in that publications list is going to be the Veterans Resource Book. So if you don't get a chance to download it from the chat, you can always go to our website and download it there, right there from the homepage. And just a quick heads up about the resource book. We are in the process of updating it. We're hoping to get a new edition out by the end of the year. So just be on the lookout for something that's going to be a fresh look. All right, so what are my California benefits? This is a quick snapshot of what is available to you based off of being a California veteran. College tuition fee waiver is one of the main ones that we get the most questions about. This is a fee waiver for our child dependents. So as long as the veteran has a disability rating between 0 and 100, and the child's income level stays underneath the state poverty line, then they can go to any state-funded school for free. So any UC, CSU, or California Community College. If you have any questions about that benefit, feel free to reach out to me or Derek. We'll have our contact information up at the end of these slides. There's also ways to make it easier to identify as a veteran here in California. So now you can actually have the word veteran printed on your driver's license. Just makes it so you don't have to carry around a DD Form 214 in your back pocket. There's programs with other programs with the DMV. So we have a motor vehicle registration fee waiver. There's also programs out there that are offered for fishing and hunting license. So you can get one that's offered at a reduced price. And there's also a state park pass that's offered at no cost for our veterans. Property tax programs are out there as well. We don't really talk about those too much because the eligibility requirements do differ across the state. So if you do have questions about those benefits, we recommend reaching out to your county veteran service office or your county veteran service office is where you probably would want to start. And on the right-hand side of the screen is the different divisions that are that fall underneath CalTAP. So that fall underneath Calvet. So CalTAP is part of the Veterans Service Division. On top of the Veterans Service Division, we also have a home loans division that's different than the federal VA home loans program. We also have a women and minority veterans division that offers advocacy, outreach, and support. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there are 8 different veteran homes for our senior veterans, and 3 different state cemeteries that are around California that you can choose to be buried in rather than the federal VA cemeteries. So if you are interested in what CalTAP's up to, you want to see more of these webinars, you want to maybe attend a live event if they're we're in your town, you can always provide your non-DoD email to that CalTAP mailbox. We'll get that. We'll add you to our constant contact mailing list, and every month you'll get a mailer that will talk about the different webinars that we're putting up for that month and the different service providers that we're working with as well. You can always go to My Calvet as well and register, or actually go to Calvet's website and register for My Calvet. This just kind of tailors information on the website more to what you're interested in and what you're looking for. And then also follow our social media pages. So we do have a Facebook page, Instagram page, and a YouTube page. So I mentioned that we have an archives page. So this is being recorded. We'll post it to our archives page. Our archives page is basically linked to our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and search for CalTAP or Calvet, you should find all the videos that we've posted over the last 4 or 5 years since we had to stop traveling and hunker down for COVID. So on top of that, you can follow our webinars, go to Constant Contact. You go find us on Constant Contact and register for those webinars there. Some of them are hosted through schools. You don't need to be a student to attend those webinars. Anyone is invited. You just ask that you register through Constant Contact. And then also there is a survey that is going to be posted at the end. There's a QR code for it. The survey just helps us with the background stuff. So it lets us know what we did well today, lets us know what we can work on in the future. If there's anything that you want to know more about, you have that chance to let us know there in the survey. So, if you do get the chance, we definitely would appreciate the feedback. So, before I close this out, I want to bring you to our information about our local interagency network coordinators. These are a great resource that's offered through Calvet. So we call them links. So there's 8 different links across California. They cover 8 different regions. So wherever you fall in California, I would recommend taking a picture of the slide or writing down the email address of your link and reaching out to them whenever you need assistance. So what they do is they provide outreach to service members, veterans, and their family members. They make referrals directly with established service providers and networks. They assist with local emergencies, and they provide leadership and advocacy to local communities. So these people are, the boots on the ground guys. They are familiar with local resources that can help veterans out in times of housing crisis, right? If you need emergency housing or that kind of resource, your link might know of outside resources that can help the veteran out that maybe aren't part of the federal VA or Calvet. They assist with local emergencies. When we had the fires up here in California a couple years ago, up in Northern California a couple years ago, our Northern Valley link, Cole Wagner, was up there right away helping out the veterans with, insurance issues, building new homes with their Calvet home loan. And he stayed up there for the most part, just until everybody was settled and secure. So that's pretty much what they do. They have connections with EDD, American Job Center in California. They have connections with the CVSOs. They're there. They go to the CVSOs on a daily basis almost. Calvet, they're part of Calvet. And also they have connections with the VA healthcare center. So if you're interested or if you're looking for those services, reach out to your link and they can help you with getting connected with that. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions about those benefits and services that I just mentioned, feel free to reach out. I check my inbox daily. If I can't answer your question, then I will do my best to direct you to somebody who can. And I also did want to bring your attention to the crisis line down at the bottom. Dial 998. This is perfect for the topic that we're talking about today. It's a resource out there that is available to veterans. Dial 998, press 1 for veterans, and you get the help that you need right away. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put this slide up. These are the contact this is the contact information for myself and Robert Storr and Derek Rose. I'm going to bring Derek Rose in real quick just to see if any questions came through that maybe he'd take care of before I can see. If not, then we will go ahead and move on and finish up the webinar.
Thank you, Michael. At this time, I don't see any questions. We just had one about the recording. And like Michael said, all of this is recorded and it will be placed on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So I dropped that link in the chat for everybody. So usually give it a few days to get it all uploaded and everything. But you're welcome to circle back with us to where you can view the recording as well as all of the other webinars that we've hosted, as Michael mentioned. So that's pretty much it right now for questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Michael, if you want to take us home.
All right, Derek, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Well, the last couple of slides, like I mentioned earlier, the survey, feel free to take a picture of the QR code right now. Take some time to fill out the survey. It's at most, I think, a 2-page survey, maybe 9 questions. But, information that's going to be valuable for us to make this program better for you guys. I also want to bring your attention to some of the upcoming webinars that we're going to be putting on for the rest of May and in June. I told you that you could search for our constant contact page. You can also just scan this QR code right here, which will take you right to our landing page. And you can find any one of these events and maybe even more right now that I wasn't able to fit on this page. But you can find any one of these events and you can register right away, get the Zoom information right there. And, we hope to see you guys at the next one. So I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you, Robert Storr and US Vets, for this important topic and being here today and giving us your time. And we want to thank you guys all for being here. And again, hope to see you guys at the next one. Thank you.